Nobody warned them it would happen this fast. One moment he was at the table with the men he loved most in the world, breaking bread, pouring wine, looking each one of them in the eyes with something they would only understand later, a look that said goodbye without saying the word. Jesus knew what was coming. He had known for a long time. And yet he sat there, unhurried, present, giving them every last moment he had. He looked at Peter and told him that before the rooster crowed twice, Peter would deny even knowing him. Peter shook his head. Impossible, not me, never. And Jesus said nothing more, just looked at him with those eyes that already knew the end of every story. After the meal, they walked to a garden called Gethsemane. It was dark. The olive trees were old, their roots deep in the soil of a city that had seen centuries of blood and prayer. Jesus asked his disciples to stay awake with him, just stay awake. That was all he asked. He walked a little further into the garden alone and fell to his knees. What happened next is one of the most human moments in all of Scripture. The Son of God, the one who had healed the blind, raised the dead, walked on water, pressed his face to the ground, and asked his Father if there was any other way. His sweat fell like drops of blood. He prayed 3 times, and 3 times he rose from the ground with the same answer written on his face. Not my will, yours. When he came back to his disciples, they were asleep, all 3 of them. In the heaviest hour he had ever carried, the people he loved most could not keep their eyes open for him. He looked at them with no anger, only sorrow, and he let them sleep a little longer. Then the torches appeared through the trees. Judas walked at the front of the crowd. He had been with Jesus for 3 years, had seen every miracle, had heard every teaching, had sat at the same table just hours before, and now he was leading soldiers straight to the man who had called him friend. The signal they had agreed on was a kiss. Judas walked up to Jesus in the dark garden surrounded by armed men and kissed him on the cheek. Jesus looked at him and said, "Friend, why are you here?" Not with rage, not with betrayal in his voice. "Friend." The soldiers moved forward and seized him. One of the disciples grabbed a sword and cut off the ear of the high priest's servant. Jesus reached out, picked up the ear from the ground, and healed the man who had come to arrest him. Even in that moment, even then they took him. The disciples scattered into the darkness, every single one of them. The men who had said they would die for him ran when the soldiers came. Peter followed at a distance, staying in the shadows, watching from far enough away that no one would connect him to the man being dragged through the streets in chains. 3 times that night someone recognized Peter. 3 times Peter looked them in the eye and said he had never met Jesus. And the 3rd time, before the words had even finished leaving his mouth, a rooster crowed somewhere in the dark city of Jerusalem. Peter remembered what Jesus had said at the table, and he went outside and wept. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before Pilate, the Roman governor who held the power of life and death in his hands. Pilate questioned him, looked for a reason to release him, told the crowd he found no fault in this man. The crowd screamed for his crucifixion anyway. Pilate's wife had dreamed about Jesus the night before. She sent a message to her husband that mourning have nothing to do with this righteous man. But the crowd was loud, and Pilate was afraid of a riot. He took a basin of water and washed his hands in front of the crowd and said, "I am innocent of this man's blood." Then he handed Jesus over to be crucified. The soldiers took him into the courtyard and put a crown of thorns on his head. They dressed him in a purple robe and mocked him. They hit him. They spit on him. And then they took the robe off and put his own clothes back on and led him through the streets of Jerusalem carrying a wooden cross on his bleeding back. The city that had cheered for him 5 days earlier when he rode in on a donkey now watched him fall under the weight of the cross in silence. A man named Simon from Cyrene was pulled from the crowd and made to carry the cross the rest of the way. They reached a hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull, and there they nailed him to the wood. Even as they drove the nails through his hands and lifted the cross into the ground, Jesus looked up at the sky and said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they are doing." He hung there for 6 hours. At the 9th hour he cried out with a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then he said, "It is finished." And he bowed his head, and he gave up his spirit. The curtain in the temple tore in 2 from top to bottom. The earth shook, rocks split apart, and a Roman soldier who had watched the entire crucifixion looked up at the body of Jesus on the cross and said something that no soldier in the history of Rome had ever said about a man they had just executed. Truly, this was the Son of God. 3 days later, the tomb was empty, and everything that had looked like the end turned out to be the beginning.